The number for BYU basketball is 3. 3 roster slots to fill, 3 assistant coaching positions to fill. What does Kevin Young have up his sleeve? We're discussing that on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Let's dive right in on today's show. And as I said, there are 3 roster slots for BYU basketball to fill and 3 assistant coaching positions for Kevin Young to fill out his complement of 5 assistant coaches. Where do things stand right now for BYU basketball? Frankly, I have a better idea on the basketball coaching front than I do on the roster front. Now, I'm not saying that BYU is not doing their due diligence on all options when it comes to the transfer portal and filling out their remaining allotment of scholarships. In fact, I know for a fact that they are doing their due diligence on that. But I have been told that BYU, similar to other reports that emerged yesterday, I think Robbie McCombs for Vanquish the Foe kind of lifted the lid on it, that all 3 assistant coaching positions for BYU essentially are spoken for. They've been locked in. I talked to somebody who is far more in the know on this and said, my question then was like, what's going on? Like, why haven't they announced this? Because if you've been a part of our Locked On Cougars insider group, I have had it on good authority that BYU's had 2 assistants waiting in the wings to announce, and maybe they're frankly just waiting for that third one. But now that it's locked in, what's the holdup here? Why are we not announcing this? So what I was told is that they're still just working their way through the HR and the onboarding process that BYU requires of hiring their people. My retort was, okay, you fast-tracked Kevin Young, you fast-tracked Brandon Dunson, you fast-tracked Chris Burgess. Why can't you fast-track these ones? But alas, that's where things stand right now for the BYU Cougars. On the coaching front, names to pay attention to. Tim Fanning is the number one I would pay attention to. I mentioned this over the weekend. It's been mentioned elsewhere that he is likely to be on the staff, and everything I'm hearing from multiple sources, yes, he was introduced as a quote-unquote friend of the program over the weekend at BYU's annual Father and Sons camp on BYU campus. Friend of the program means assistant coach in waiting, essentially. He just needs to be announced. And there are other names out there. Will Voigt is one that's been bandied about a lot. He is now not the assistant. He's the head coach of the Austin Toros, the G League affiliate of the San Antonio Spurs. His name has been one that's been linked very heavily to this position, one of the positions on BYU staff. Does he have to leave the G League and join up with a buddy of his and Kevin Young at BYU? We'll see. So it sounds like they're close. Now, the timing of that, could it come out as of when you're listening to this podcast? Could have already happened? Sure. Could have happened 2 or 3 weeks from now. Absolutely. But that's where things stand on that front. Now, when it comes to BYU players, BYU is turning over every stone and looking at every option out there, both in this recruiting cycle as well as future recruiting cycles. Yesterday, Mike Luke, who covers the Arizona Wildcats for Phoenix Sports down there in Arizona, he mentioned that Jaxson Sainon, excuse me, had to get that name right. It was a crazy day yesterday. He decommitted from Arizona and then immediately committed to ASU. But Mike Luke mentioned that Jaxson Sainon was all but BYU's, speaking of them having him essentially waiting to commit to BYU. But they said he could not get admitted to school. Does that mean there's grades at play? I would venture a guess that's probably the likeliest scenario. But BYU admissions, they have their reasons for denying guys opportunities to enroll at the school. I can tell you this much. Jaxson Sainon would have been an incredible addition to an already stellar recruiting cycle for BYU. This guy is rated 97 by 24/7 Sports, and that's actually the low rating because he's rated as a 5-star prospect on the 24/7 Sports composite rating. He's the 22nd nationally rated player, 24th in the composite. Just an incredible athlete, 6'5" wing player. And as of recording of this podcast, I stayed up very, very late, hoping to see if Jackson Robinson had announced anything. as of recording of this podcast, I had not seen anything, so I just said, you know what, we'll push off. If he makes that announcement, we'll react to it on tomorrow's podcast. But Jaxson would have been a fantastic wing player to have in that slot for BYU, even if Jaxson Robinson, as I expect, is not returning to BYU. But alas, that is not going to happen. But they are continuing to look at multiple options. Our Locked On Cougars Insider Group, a couple people asked me, well, Jake, what's the latest on Berke Buyuktuncel? What I have been told is it's down to essentially Nebraska and BYU, and it's anybody's guess which of those two schools he picks. And ultimately, when he picks, that he's going to announce where he's committing to. Buyuktuncel, obviously, you might recall, he's a Turkish forward, played for UCLA last year, had a limited role due to some injury concerns, but has bona fide credentials, is a very, very nice stretch 4 option for BYU. Mawot Mag is also out there. He is reportedly down to San Diego State and BYU in his own right. We talked about him earlier this week on the podcast. He's more of your defensive stopper type as a 4-man, maybe not necessarily the most offensive oriented player, unlike Berke, but either one or both of them, I think, be welcome additions to BYU's roster, considering that 4 spot really only has Brody Kozlowski right now sitting in it after Noah Waterman opted to go to Louisville. So there are options on the table. And Travis Hansen, by the way, if you did not hear Travis Hansen on my radio show, DJ and PK on the KSL Sports Zone yesterday, you need to go back and listen to it. He was super insightful on, by the way, this is how Travis, who speaks Russian, says you pronounce Igor Demon's name. It's actually Yegor Denim. That's what he said, Yegor Denim. That's how you pronounce his name correctly. He was insightful on that, said he sat in on the presentation with Kevin Young as they presented Yegor's family with what they had envisioned for him and sold him on what BYU could do for Denim, and ultimately picked BYU. And I think that's a very cool thing. But he also did mention that he's looking at BYU in terms of filling out their roster. He says they still need a rim running big. You know what screams to me? And he mentioned the name Derek Lively. And remember, Derek Lively was is and has been a fantastic player for the Dallas Mavericks. He's a 7-foot rim running center. I've been saying BYU needs a big man, a true big man in the middle of that in that lineup. Can they get that? TBD. Jaxson is more of the wing Jaxson Robinson type that he also mentioned that you probably need to fill out that roster with, but they'll look elsewhere on that. But it feels like there are options, multiple options on the table, and Kevin Young is working fervently to get the deal done, get the deals, I should say, done, and get his roster filled out. Maybe he doesn't carry a full complement of 13 scholarship players, by the way. That's the other thing about this, is a couple of you asked me, what's the number that Yegor Denim is commanding in NIL? The reports are it's north of $1 million. And as I understand what BYU's collective situation sits like, that is essentially an outlier as to what BYU has been willing to pay in the past. But if these boosters are willing to step up and foot those bills, why not? Go out and get as many guys as you possibly can get. There are options. There are multiple options out there. There's the Hawkins kid from Illinois who announced he's withdrawing from the draft and he's going to transfer. He's one of the higher paid, if not one of the highest paid last year, NIL guys. Well, if you're going to play Jaxson potentially quite a sum of money, why can't you transfer that money over and go and see if Hawkins is interested in joining up with BYU? The nice part is there is a lot of momentum for BYU on the recruiting trail right now. They've got a lot of goodwill built up. And Kevin Young, he continues to absolutely impress and and show people what he's capable of. He's not a showman by any means. Let's be very, very clear about that. He's kind of the anti-Mark Pope in that regard. But what he is, he's a proven coach who's got a vision for what he wants to accomplish at BYU, and he's going about executing the best way he knows how. And if everything pans out the way that things appear that they could, BYU could have themselves a very, very nice setup in basketball moving forward here. It's an exciting time. Honestly, it's just a really exciting time for what BYU is accomplishing. And so Berke Buyuktuncel, Mawot Mag, and they also just offered yesterday Caleb Wilson from the 2025 recruiting class. So it's a year out. But he is only, I think he's rated 99 by 24/7 Sports, 6'9", 205-pound forward wing player. He is the number 6 rated nationally rated athlete in the entire country. It's just the guys that BYU is swinging for. There's no longer BYU's mentality of thinking, okay, we can go to a certain level of getting guys. No, Kevin Young refuses. He absolutely steadfastly refuses to accept the fact that he can't get the elite of the elite to Provo, Utah. He starts to pull this off, and I'll tell you, Denham is just the first, it feels like, in what it could be a cavalcade of high-level players coming to BYU. And if Kevin Young proves that he can develop these guys, get them to the NBA level, then that's a monster win for the Cougars on that front. And we'll see what ultimately pans out with that. It's one of those crazy things to see what's happening. And apologies for the blip there. It looked like something may have gone wrong, but it looks like the recruiting came through. So we're going to kind of gerrymander this together. But coming up next, we're going to flip over and talk a little bit about BYU football. Now, the regards of what BYU football can do to match basketball, that's one thing. But also, Tom Homo, he obviously has purview over all of BYU athletics. What could he do? How can he help BYU football potentially match what BYU basketball is doing right now? We'll get into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys to get you the tickets to wherever you want to go. We all know that they got the NBA playoffs ongoing right now, but even if you want to go to concerts, sporting events, theater, no matter what you're into, Game Time has got them for you. The best part is they give you tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets tip-off for some of these NBA games. So with last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying your NBA tickets or really any tickets to anything you want to go to. The best part is they have last-minute deals, flash deals, zone deals. It's easy to find and buy your tickets, and the best part is they're 2 taps. They're in your account, and you're on the way to the event. You open up the app, they scan the tickets, and you're on your way in to whatever you're going to watch. The best part is you can download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen. I want to encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to check out Locked On's first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's on YouTube. It's also available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app, the free Fire TV channels app, excuse me. It's Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league as well. Find Locked On Sports Today available now wherever you get your videos on either Fire TV channels app or on YouTube as well. All right, let's talk about what's going on in BYU football. The biggest thing for football right now is that they're trying to match what BYU basketball is doing. And I know that seems like a given. I get that. But here's the deal. The cachet, the momentum, the pizzazz, the overall fire coming out of the BYU basketball program right now, it's overshadowing a little bit of what BYU football is doing. And I get why, because BYU football is coming off a disappointing season a year ago. Did they thrill that many people when it came to the transfer portal, trying to go out and get a quarterback or trying to bolster this lineup? No, they didn't. And in fact, BYU football opted more for continuity's sake. They're banking on kind of what BYU basketball went through in the transition year from the West Coast Conference to the Big 12, where they are saying essentially, we're going to trust the guys we have in this system, train them up, and hope that they have a payoff similar to what BYU basketball had year one in the Big 12. Maybe they should have done that year one in the Big 12, but they thought that was the best course of action to try and load up on some transfer portal guys and see if it would pay off. And it didn't. Honestly, they finished 5-7. They missed out on the postseason for the first time since 2017, just the 5th time since the turn of the century, and it didn't leave a good taste in anybody's mouth. Fans, administrators, coaches, players, to a man or woman, whoever it might be involved, they were not happy with how things rounded out last season. So they've gone about trying to retool things. Have they done a perfect job? No, I don't think anybody would say they've done a perfect job. But the bigger point to be made here, I think, for BYU football is just sit back. the next month, and they've already started this, they got a ton of official visits upcoming, as well as their annual summer camps when a lot of offers and also commitments come into the BYU football program. We talked yesterday about how they're having Micah Matthews on campus this week. He's actually in the middle of his visit right now. There are going to be visits happening every weekend throughout the month of June with high-level athletes, and we're talking guys that are four-star type talents that BYU traditionally doesn't even get in on that they're looking at. And also there are other athletes out there that may not have even registered on your radar in terms of the caliber of athlete that BYU is going after in football. Don't think that BYU football is not standing idly by and going after the lower level players. The era of the Elisa Tuiaki, Ed Lamb regime, where they're like, oh, if anybody recruits that guy, we're done trying to chase him. We're if you're in with us, we're in with you, and that's it. No, they're swinging for the fences just like BYU basketball is. They're offering high-level guys. They've got high-level guys like Micah Matthews. Folks, he's a legit MLB draft pick waiting to happen in baseball. And oh, by the way, he's a four-star talent in football. This is a young man who is going places professionally in sports, it appears. He could opt to go to baseball, but at the same time, he's got family connection to the state of Utah via his mother, who is Samoan. He's got family that lives here in Utah, and that's why he's coming out to check out BYU. He's also going to check out Utah later this weekend as well on official visits. But that's just the kind of the tip of the iceberg of who BYU's bringing in. LaMason Waller is a high-level talent and wide receiver that I would have never figured BYU was going to get an official visit from him. He's got one scheduled for next month. You kind of go down the list of guys that BYU has set up to visit on official visits this coming month and change. It's an incredible list. There's a lot of homegrown talent, no doubt. Aaron Dunn visited last week, and there's going to be guys like Austin Pay. I'm sure he's going to set up an official visit at some point down the line. He's a kid proverbially in the backyard here in Provo. He's got visits set up elsewhere in the country, but he can make a visit to BYU anytime he wants. His brother Connor is on this podcast for crying out loud. But the bigger point to be made here is don't think that BYU football is just letting things pass them by. They are working diligently to get things right. It's not perfect by any means, and nor will it ever be, because recruiting is an inexact science to begin with in terms of evaluation. And then, oh, by the way, you're dealing with so many variables of young men who may just not be interested in playing for your university. That's the other wild card in all of this. So it's kind of funny about this. And I've got questions from our Locked On Cougars insider group saying, David here for David McDonough. And it's a great question here. He says, I sure wish football recruiting go as well as it's going for basketball. But honestly, the very nature of the numbers is such that 3 or 4 incredible recruits can completely change the direction of a basketball team, whereas it takes at least 3 times that to make the same impact for a football team. David nailed it here, because it's absolutely the case. 1, 2, 3 star players for a basketball program can elevate you to Elite 8/Final Four territory, whereas, as David mentioned, you need 3 or 4 times that in football to elevate you to college football playoff consideration. The numbers just don't track in terms of the impact single players can have. Yes, quarterback is a position that you absolutely need to nail to have success in college football. And there's major question marks around that for the BYU football program right now. But the simple fact of the trope of saying, well, BYU football is not even trying right now, and they need to be on the hot seat. It's false. They are trying. They are absolutely trying. And I'm not trying to come off as some apologist who's trying to snivel and sign up for, or not trying to sign up for, but essentially suck up to BYU football. I'm just stating what it is. And that's the thing about this is you look at it and they're trying to do their best to find the right options for them, but they're also banking on guys who experienced the Big 12 a year ago and the chip on their shoulder that they want to improve. They're banking on that, essentially carrying them through in year 2 in the Big 12. I also look at other questions here coming in from other people on our Locked On Cougars Insider group. What improvements this offseason for football? Where do you see them ending up ranking wise with all the improvements going on? That's a great question. I've said it once, I'll say it again. The goal for me with BYU football is get to 6-6. I know that's an artificially low number, but get back to the postseason. Show progress. You get to 7-8 wins, awesome. But my stated goal as your host here is 6-6. I just want to see progress from this BYU football team. They can look at their arch rival, the Utah Utes, and I know that irks Cougar fans to no end, but watch, if you look at the career arc of what the Kyle Whittingham Pac-12 era has been for Utah, they started out very, very slow. They had a surprising first year and a very down year for the Pac-12. Follow that up with 2 5-7 seasons, putting a ton of pressure on the program. And then they essentially got things going in terms of recruiting and started building, and ultimately ended up as a multi-time Pac-12 championship appearance in terms of playing in the Pac-12 title game, as well as winning it. It'd take about a decade for Utah to get where they're going. Can BYU speed up that process just a little bit, maybe pull it off in 5 or 6 years? That's the hope, but it takes a process here. And I know what BYU basketball has done has essentially set I don't know how to say it right, has set like maybe this expectation level for BYU football and the frustration level that fans feel from last season. It's maybe caused it to be a little too out of whack, but that's what you got to deal with. And I just, BYU football, trust that they're trying to get it right. They're not trying to go out there and get fired. These coaches love what they do, and they do not want to see their jobs lost due to poor performance. And the players, they feel the heat. I've got a question here. Let's see. Let's pull it up here. Great question here from Tyson Clark. Do you plan on getting more football players on the podcast as regulars like you have Connor Pay doing? I'd love to. I've talked with some people involved in terms of getting players on the podcast. You have to do some NIL deals to work that out. And obviously that involves money. Like, okay. But we're working on that. We're considering all options. But even if we don't, Connor has been more than gracious with his time, and he loves doing it, and he loves you guys out there in Cougar Nation. But at the same time, just Connor as an example, that is a man who's got a burning desire to go stick it to everybody who is counting BYU football out. And it's nothing personal. This is a kid, and he, along with many of his teammates, they have a burning desire to be the best football players they can be. Connor has aspirations of playing in the professional ranks. Well, guess what? When you go 5-7 and the offensive line looked as bad as it did at times last year, that grinds his gears. And he's working like double and triple time to get it right this year. He has truly become a leader. And I'm not privy to all that he's doing behind the scenes, but I know a lot of what he's doing behind the scenes. And it's more than most offensive linemen, I would venture, in the entire country are taking on at this point. So don't confuse what BYU football is trying to do as saying that they're mailing it in versus what BYU basketball is doing. BYU basketball is stealing the headlines. It's absolutely clear, and there's no doubt about that. But BYU football, they're doing their thing as well. And I think they actually love the fact that BYU basketball might be overshadowing them for the time being, because at some point the spotlight's going to come right back on BYU football, and it's going to cause some fans to say some things on some social media platforms or message boards that players, coaches, administrators are all going to see, and it's going to make them angry. But you got to go answer the critics and show what you're capable of. So I'll step off the soapbox now, but the BYU football program, they're just simply not they are not sitting idly by and letting the basketball program steal the headlines and BYU football program is going to melt into obscurity. That's just not that's not going to happen. Kalani Sitake, Aaron Roderick, Jay Hill, on down the list, these assistant coaches, they want to get it right. Their livelihoods depend on BYU football getting it right. So just slow the roll a little bit in terms of some of the down notes I get every so often on the BYU football program when you compare it with BYU basketball. I think it's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison, and I that's the way I perceive it. And I'm your host, and I sit down in front of a camera and talk into it every single evening, and you guys consume it. And I welcome the feedback. If you disagree, you agree, indifferent, whatever it is, let me know. But I think that we've gotten a little bit out of tune with what BYU football is trying to accomplish when you compare it with BYU basketball. I just don't necessarily think, I think David nailed it. Trying to compare those two, the numbers alone in terms of the roster sizes, etc., they just don't measure up. There are things both programs could do better. Frankly, I don't know, maybe not BYU basketball, but BYU football could do things better. Sure, they could. But as long as they go out there and win, does it really matter? All right. That's enough of that. That's bad. I'm taking a lot of time here. I meant to answer some more questions from our Locked On Cougars insider group that I solicited via our insider group yesterday. We'll get to as many of those in the time remaining. We don't have a lot of time remaining, but we'll get to that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, I've already mentioned it a couple of times, or at least 3 times on today's show, about our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a great way to get information in the moment I'm hearing it. I'm able to pass it along to you. It comes to you in the form of a text message. Doesn't get much easier than that. You can sign up in the link in the show notes, whether you're watching and or listening to this. 14-day free trial to get it, 2 weeks worth of insider tidbits I'm passing along, and then just $5 a month afterwards to join us. And hopefully you guys will consider doing it. We've got a great group going right now, and we'd love nothing more than to have more of Cougar Nation joining us there. And I say that because, and let me also acknowledge, there are a number of other things out there. I know Give 'em Hell Brigham has their Discord page. I know that you have Coug Connect out there who's got their stuff. I get that your dollars are already being stretched very thin. So I'm just saying, consider it. That's all I would say is just consider it. Sign up for the 14-day free trial. You don't think it's worth your time or your money? No harm, no foul, no offense taken. So consider it and click the link in the show notes below. All right. A few more questions before we go here. And a little bit of a disjointed show because, like I said, I found a little bit of a tangent there. I meant to talk more about what Tom Homo told my friend Mitch Harper yesterday. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow more in depth. But let's see. I think I've answered a lot of these questions here. So Peter Beckman says, could the commitment of Yegor Denim help sway a guy like Berke Buyuktuncel to pick BYU over Nebraska? I'd absolutely think so, Peter. And I hope so, because that's a guy, they're both from Europe. I'm sure that Buyuktuncel is aware of who Denim is and would be talking with people and saying, hey, you want to probably go play with that kid. So keep an eye on that. It's the biggest thing in terms of that. Kevin Duncan, who do you see as a starting 5 in rotation? And for those of you who might not start, do you think they will accept their role? Well, they kind of have to, honestly. I think the starting lineup right now to me is going to be Yegor Denim and Dallin Hall in the backcourt. I think it'd be your 1-2 tandem at the guard spots. I think your wing players right now, because you don't have everybody signed right now, I think your wing players right now would be Trevin Nell and probably Richie Saunders. That's probably what I'm looking at right now. That could obviously change very quickly. Brody Kozlowski could still that slot if they don't bring another 4-man in. And I think you're in the middle right now. You're probably looking at a combo. I would say that you probably give the nod right now to Fousseyni Traore, but do not count out Keba Keita. And I think everybody else on that roster, Trey Stewart on down the list, are going to have to accept their role. Elijah Crawford, I'm sure, is going to be pushing for playing time in his own right because he's a very phenomenal scorer. But I think he's in that 6th-man role, at least on my paper right now. But I'm not Kevin Young, and I don't have the say that that some people might think I have. So that's the funny thing about this. All right, other questions here. All right, what players do BYU need? Does BYU basketball need to get to the Elite 8? Coming in from our good friend Danny Drew. Guys like let's say they could have gotten a guy like Josan Seinan. That'd been great to have. Also, you maybe some of the other talented players that BYU's chasing out there on the recruiting front. You get the Buyuktuncel kid, you get Mawot Mag. Those are all pieces to help you get to that level. Now, BYU has that ignominious streak of being the most appearances in the NCAA tournament without a Final Four berth. They've only made it to the Elite 8 the one time, if I recall correctly, with Danny Ainge leading the way. Obviously, that thrilling play in 1981. So, yeah, you need just high-level players. And I can tell you that Kevin Young wants to get the highest level players he possibly can get. All right, I got to wrap this up here. So there's other questions out there. I will get to them on tomorrow's show. Like I said, I didn't mean to get off on a tangent like I did, but hey, it's a podcast. It is what it is. 2 other questions, though, real quick. These are kind of off the cuff ones. Andrew Lida, what is your favorite science fiction book series? It's a great question. I read a lot as a kid. I need to get back to reading more as an adult. I read a fair amount, but I don't read nearly as much as I did as a kid. I'm not going to lie. Ender's Game was like one of those transformative books for me as a kid, and I read a ton of the Ender's universe type stuff after I read that book. And so I'd probably say that kind of that Ender's Game. I don't know if it's a series, though. Like, maybe that counts. Maybe it doesn't. Andrew, let me know that. That's the one I'd probably point to right now. And then the other one here from Matt Moon. Did you play Pokemon growing up? And if so, which one is your favorite? I did play Pokemon. I actually played Pokemon Go for quite a while. I still have it on my phone. I probably should open the app at some point and get back to playing it. I did play Pokemon. Me and my brother, who's just younger than me, we are separated by about a year and a half. He and I were Game Boy kids growing up, and we got for Christmas one year the original blue and red versions of Pokemon. I had the blue version. He had the red version, and we played them till we literally wore those cartridges out. My favorite in terms of the starting 3 in that series, give me Squirtle all day and every day. day. That's my guy to start off, obviously, in your adventure. My favorite Pokemon, though, overall, it's a good question. Charizard's a legend. Man, I could go on and on about this. This is putting me on the spot here. Maybe, I don't know. Give me Mewtwo. I'm just fascinated by Mewtwo. I know he's like one of the more powerful, if not the most powerful of the original 150, but legendary Pokemon in his own right. Alakazam was one of my favorites. I'm really nerding out all of a sudden. And those of you who are still listening and are watching this are probably saying, holy smokes, you really do nerd out a lot. I did. Trust me, I'm a nerd. I just happen to talk about a lot of sports, but I got a lot of nerddom qualities about me as well. So Matt, thank you for the question. All right. I've gone way over time, I think. And like I said, I'm recording this. I had a little bit of a blip there, so I'm going to have to put this back together on post-prod. But nonetheless, thank you for your support of the podcast. Appreciate all of you for being with us. Those of you in the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, even if you're a first-time watcher and or listener, just stopping by and checking things out. Appreciate any and all support you give the podcast, as always. So thank you once again, as we like to say, for making it your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers. And until tomorrow, we get to more of these questions. Have a great rest of your day. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.